now about the transition after communism, because of course 300 million people were killed by communism during the 20th century, and of course Hitler killed around about 15 million civilians in World War Two, and around 10 million Russian soldiers as well, because of course the Russian army and partisan groups combined together were around 60 million men and women fighting against the Nazis, basically the National Socialists from Germany. But many people swapped sides during the war. It was not a clear debate, and one of the things that is not mentioned strongly enough is the fact that the Soviets invaded Eastern Poland at the same time that the Germans invaded Western Poland. The Allies, of course, were allied to the Soviet Union, the greatest mass murderers in history, aside from Mao, of course, because Stalin killed around 60 million of the 300 million people who were killed by communism, and Mao killed around 80 million. All while Nixon, of course, recognised communist China. And they're still killing around 1 million people to this day per year, every year. So, and we're, of course, all trading with China now. That shows the hypocrisy of the West in many ways, which I'm very critical of, even though I'm a pan-Western nationalist and a social democrat. As I mentioned in the first video, the communists, of course, killed the social democratic government literally in the Soviet Union. They banned unions. So, as from Jeremy Clarkson's comments about in Britain recently about wanting to kill off the union movement or have them executed, as he said, it was a joke, but he'll feel very happy and comfortable in China where unions are banned. I thought I'd get that into at least one video. But back to Russia. As NATO basically broke the back of the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union reacted as it always has as the inheritor of the military state legacy and the intelligence state legacy of the Soviet Union. Now Russia's becoming the Eurasian Union. The system hasn't changed at all. That Russia's seeming facade of strength, of the thousands of tanks, many of which were rusting and wouldn't work, which were incidentally sold off by Victor Bout, who's the famous Lord of War, or infamous Lord of War, arms dealer, who the Russians are still trying to protect, although he's in an American prison. Have basically continued to fund the arms trade, as you've seen with Syria, and the Russians have a naval base there. Still, they're still trying to control the Middle East. They have cut off the supply routes in coordination with Pakistan to isolate the NATO troops in Afghanistan. They are still a strong military force, even though their equipment isn't very good. On the level of the common soldier, but they have an advanced technological military establishment, and that's continued. Also the power of the intelligence agencies after Glasnost, as Gorbachev was arrested by generals, taken hostage, and he was eventually released. But that led on to Yeltsin declaring independence of Russia from the Soviet Union. But the intelligence guys, the KGB guys, who are now called the FSB, they of course were waiting in the wings, and what they were opposed by was the influence of the Italian mafia in Russia, which gave rise to the Russian mafia, which is a sort of semi-independent organisation, and they of course were called the wrestlers or the boxers after the fall of the Soviet Union, because they recruited wrestlers and boxers who were dormant to start to enforce their power. And of course, in Russia you have military service, so everybody already knew how to use firearms, and the country was awash with firearms, and also the idea that outside of Muscovy itself, which is the heart of the Russian civilization, um, which of course couldn't control the independence movements of Ukraine or Belarus, which is still a dictatorship, or the others parts of the Warsaw Pact Empire, which went away. Although the Soviet Union, as it broke up, was still saying it wasn't an empire when it was. There were various rebel and Islamic movements to the south in the Caucasus and the east, from Kazan and others. Although the Kazan people have remained staunchly pro-Moscow in recent years, it got rid of another facade that Russia was either communist dominated or Orthodox Church dominated. It will be a Muslim dominated country very soon, and probably the Red Army by 2015 will be mostly Muslim. And you can see the radicalisation of those people from the amount of money that the Saudis are pumping into the country. Those are the Saudis and the Bin Ladens who did 9/11. So you can see this process is continuing, the Muslim and Islamification of Russia, which means that although Siberian movements for independence are around, and the flood of Chinese and Koreans into Han Chinese and Koreans and Mongolians into the steppes is continuing as the Russian population around Vladivostok falls. The real problem for Russian nationalism is, despite the fact that there is a consensus on nationalism within Russia's parties, the Communists, the Liberal Democrats, the United Russia Party under Putin and Medvedev, who are rivals, has continued. The actual degree of territory that the Slavic population of Russia actually holds by living in it is decreasing, even though Russia's power and economic power is continuing. But it's still a resource-based exploitation economy, as it was under the Tsars. Just like the Romans, the Tsars controlled the supply of salt to the peasantry to keep them under control. Today, it's the Russian central bank keeps control over the money supply. But you can see still the schism between business and the governmental elite is very stark. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the Jewish gangsters and oligarchs like I think it's not Brzezinski, like the Romanov, who built Chelsea, and the oligarchs are mostly a Zionist organisation. They were also, of course, vying with the native Russian mafia, which of course had some people who were Zionists in it. This was not directly controlled from Israel or anything like that. It wasn't a conspiracy. These were people who already lived within the Soviet Union and made their way up the food chain from selling toys on the street to taking over car companies and then the oil companies like Gazprom. But of course, this was a fight between them and a KGB intelligence organisation, but weren't exactly within the state. Within the state itself. Yeltsin was weak and drunk for most of the time, and could be pushed around by the Americans for the most part. But Putin was there in the wings, waiting to become the president of Russia. And for all his faults, for all the fact that he is part of a managed democracy and a dictatorship, he did stop the increase of the Russian mafia and also the Jewish oligarchs within Russia. Still, 25% of the Russian economy is still controlled by the mafia and Jewish oligarchs, but